Welcome to the Economic Development Subcommittee meeting on May 13th. We'll rise and salute the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
Roll call of the members. Councilor Guarino Sawaya.
Here.
Here. Councilor Haas.
Here.
Here. Councilor McKenna.
Here.
Here. Councilor Silvestri.
Here.
Here. And Chairman Jaramillo.
Here.
Here. A quorum is present. There's one item on tonight's agenda, and that is a preliminary discussion relative to zoning for cannabis dispensaries.
Wonderful. I will call on the presenter of the motion, Councilor Silvestri.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So before us tonight, and that's exactly what this is, the preliminary conversations. I think it's now time. We've had 15 years since the cannabis bill has been passed. We've had the time to sit back and work out all the fears, you know, everything that people were worried about. You know, we've got to see the Cannabis Commission work from the state level on down and work out all the kinks. And now I think it's time that our city takes advantage of that benefit. Now, there are a few ways that we can do this. I think the best and most efficient way is a route other cities have taken, and that's to go by the quota of liquor store licenses or package store licenses that you have, and then you break that down and it's a percentage. That would allow us to put roughly 3-point-something dispensaries in the city of Revere, where we already have one licensed. We do have 2 other possible idea locations that we have councilors that are in agreement to put them in their wards if we were to pass this. And we do have Tom from Economic Development was good enough to come here and give us some information, as well as he was in Economic Development in Fitchburg that really turned around and cultivated the cannabis industry and is now one of their biggest industries in Fitchburg. So, Tom, if you have a few minutes.
Hello. Name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, councilors. Tom Skorowski, 281 Broadway. Happy to be here as a resource to help you all through this journey. It sounds like through your opening comments here, Councilor, we're well on our way to forging a path here. Just for a little bit of background, so my first week on the job in Fitchburg was when the legislation locally for recreational cannabis started to make its way through the city council and the planning board there. Fast forward 5 years later, we had 13 grow facilities that were permitted, 8 retail facilities that were permitted, and a lot of experience that I gathered over, you know, what went right, what didn't, lessons learned. But, you know, I think if I were to sum it up in a few different themes for things you all should think about, you hit the nail on the head with the first is what the quota would be. So if you went by the statutory kind of minimum of 20% of the package store licenses, we'd have 3 facilities. You can raise that if you'd like. In Fitchburg, they raised it to 40%, so they went from 4 to 8. To be quite honest, I thought that was overkill then. I think especially in today's market, that's probably would saturate the market a bit too much, but that's one consideration you should make, what that number would be. Obviously, what areas you'd like to put this in. Thinking of a few off the cuff, the GB districts, maybe certain elements of them, but perhaps not all of them. The RC2 district and the TED districts are kind of the ones that come to mind. And whether or not you would want to just add this as a use on top of existing districts or create a new overlay. If you were to expand from 1 to 3, you might want to have it, you know, be a larger geographic area than it is allowed today. And then thinking about things like the intensity of the use and where you would cite the use. So in Fitchburg, we had a 300-foot buffer for areas where children could potentially congregate, whether it be schools or churches or even residences. And this was a buffer that could be waived by the permit granting authority, and often was, to be honest, if the applicant made a really good case as to why, how they were actively preventing open marketing to children, right? Or how they were actively preventing clear sort of clashes between the uses, and basically, in a word, being a bit more discreet about it. And I think in the end, we felt like a waiver that could be worked through with adequate evidence seemed to be a really good way to not create a rule that was too rigid and say you can't have it anywhere, but one that did set some guardrails that the permit granting authority could allow, provided they did it the right way. And then thinking about things like, public safety plans, security plans, things like that are pretty standard in the industry. And I think you'll find if you're working with a strong applicant, they've got all that stuff lined up. They've got a good security team. Often they are working in tandem with folks either in law enforcement or, that are now contracting after decades in law enforcement that have really strong security plans together. And if I could just say one thing, ultimately, amidst all that growth that we saw there in the industry, it, on the ground, basically operated like any other store would. And I think there was a bit of doom and gloom in the beginning about what might happen in this industry when things opened up. But I think as you've seen with some of our partners around the region, it often operates much like any other retail facility. So I think if you do it right, if you put the right guardrails in place and you ask the right questions, you'll get the right types of development that I think can fit in well with the city. I'm happy to answer any other sort of questions about process or any other ways I can provide support here.
Thank you, Tom. Councilor Hass?
Tom, thanks so much for being here. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about your experience in Fitchburg and if Fitchburg had any community impact fees. I think those were 3% of the gross sales. Is that a rule of thumb for a cannabis shop that opens up?
Right. So I don't want to say the numbers and trip over myself this evening, but there's figures that are connected both to the manufacturing facilities and what you produce and the retail sales, and I believe it is 3%. But there is also the impact fees. That was one challenge we faced, and you may have seen it in news throughout the Commonwealth, is originally communities were kind of charging a flat rate, but then over time that led to fraud and abuse in some communities. I think Fall River might be the worst example of that, but the CCC has then, since that time, worked to make sure that you're kind of tying back any sort of impact fees back to actual impacts on the community, whether it's additional burdens on the police and fire or things of that nature. But then above and beyond that, there is that just overriding revenue generator that you can get through that fee.
Great, thank you. And in Fitchburg, was there a certain distance? I know you spoke about churches and schools and things like that. Was there a certain distance that you looked at when a cannabis shop opened up or a complex?
Right. So 300 feet from any place where children could congregate, so churches, schools, things of that nature, and residences, but it could be waived. So one example, we had one that as the crow flew was 300 feet from a vocational school, but because of the parcel lines and the frontage, it was actually on a different road and pretty well kind of hidden off from the school. Although they were 300 feet away, you weren't driving past it to go to school every day. It was on a separate cul-de-sac. So it seemed reasonable to allow for that variance, if I say variance, but waiver, because of those conditions. So I think it's good to have a rule of thumb that is not too rigid, but allows flexibility for the council to make those determinations at the end of the day.
Great, thank you.
Councilor Cogliandro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Through you to Mr. Skorowski. In Fitchburg, I think you said you had 8 retail locations. My questions are, what was the revenue like in Fitchburg, and what was the traffic like surrounding those areas? Did it increase? Was it a hassle for the areas it was in for all the cars coming in and out? And was it financially a good move to open those dispensaries for Fitchburg?
So I'll take the second question first, the traffic. We had initially some really well-thought traffic plans in place for that initial rush, and, you know, having police details on hand and having, you know, really rigid traffic control measures in place. And, you know, honestly, for the first couple months, it made sense. This was back when these were the first shops to open in the Commonwealth, and there really were lines all around. But that went away pretty quickly as more stores proliferated, and I don't think traffic's an issue there anymore.
So basically, it's like if any other big business opened up, it would be an initial boom, and then it would slowly dissipate to being normal.
Exactly. And then on the fiscal side, I didn't, I can't tell you the exact numbers, but I can tell you it helped insulate us pretty well from a lot of other challenges other communities in the region faced, and actually allowed us to do some of our more aggressive sort of planning and infrastructure work because we did have that additional growth.
That was actually part of my final question was, what did you allot that money specifically to certain, you know, certain areas of the city, like infrastructure or, you know, mental health or anything like that?
So there was never that kind of direct accounting towards here's where all that money is and here's how it's being distributed. It just basically allowed for a rising tide to lift all boats, so to speak, in the municipal budget.
So in your opinion, it would benefit Revere to host 3 establishments?
I do believe so.
Thank you very much.
Councilor Guarino Sawaya.
Thank you. I have just a quick question. In the state of Massachusetts, isn't the law or the ordinance 500 feet from a school, from the entrance of a school? And what could be done? We have to create a new ordinance to make it closer? Because I know it's 500 feet.
So 300 was what we had used at that time, and I think because it wasn't a hard and fast rule, but it was one that could be waived. Perhaps it never crossed the Attorney General's desk. I don't know what to tell you there, but I think what we would ultimately do is create our own zoning ordinance that would set the parameters and model it best we could off of those state laws and guidelines.
And then once these are built, won't we have to hire more police?
Honestly, I don't want to speak on behalf of the chief of police, but in the Fitchburg example, as I had indicated, I think it ultimately acted not differently from any other retail shop or a package store. And to Councilor Haas's point, if there is a burden that can be found that's above and beyond traditional retail, we could identify that as an impact fee and essentially charge the retail operators for that. I wouldn't anticipate it, though. But again, caveat being I'm not the chief of police, so.
Thank you.
Councilor McKenna.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To answer the councilor's question, these facilities are so heavily monitored that really, I mean, it's like Fort Knox to get in, you know, and they have their own security. So if I think anything happens, they do have their own security, and they're heavily monitored. Excuse me? How do I know that? I don't know. Anyways, I'm not going to answer that question. Research, thank you. But 9 years ago, I voted no for the facilities to come in. And because Revere and Lawrence were the only 2 cities that voted no 18 years ago or 15 years ago for recreational marijuana, we got the option of voting no. But a lot has changed in 9 years. You know, I feel the governor just lessened the sentences of marijuana users that were in jail. So I think it's people are seeing the benefits of it for medical, for everything. So, you know, my whole saying no has changed. It really has. I've seen the benefits of it for people that were sick. I've seen the benefits of it, using marijuana or gummies or whatever you use for ailments. I do think there's not enough study when you're driving, but I do feel it's beneficial now after 9 years. So that's where I am. Thank you.
Councilor Silvestri.
Thank you for leaving, Mr. Chairman. Tom, Mr. Chairman, through you to Tom. What do you see a benefit in us creating our own maybe cannabis subcommittee or cannabis commission that adds entities of city councils, development, economic development, license commission? In this way, there's a really strong committee that comes up with the way we want to bring this out and roll this out, and also who we see come before us to make sure we're not bringing in just anybody, and we're bringing in someone that is strong in the business. Also, I'd like to see a social equity license, if possible, in those three, if we could put that in. So I think these are all things that we could really sit down and talk to as a group and really work out.
I'd be happy to participate in something like that, and I think it would be good to have a cross-curricular group of folks in different elements of this work working together on something like this. And I think to your point of knowing the difference between the types of applicants, I will say you'll know it when you see it. If you put together a strong zoning ordinance and a strong set of requirements, the good ones become apparent when they submit an application. And I know that sounds quite simple, but it generally turns out being that way. I think the ones in this field that have done this work are quite sophisticated. And I do think at the same time, I would love the idea of carving out an equity license to make sure that we are making sure this industry is open up to everybody.
Thank you.
Councilor McKenna.
Thank you. I just want to say one other thing that, now you can get gummies and marijuana and THC or whatever, people deliver it, So say Happy Valley in Chelsea, they can deliver it in Revere. So we're losing out. We really are losing out on the benefits, and the revenue. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Great. Yeah. Recognize. Name and address for the record.
Michelle Kelly, Derby Road. I have to say, I don't think that I would be a proponent or in support of this. But what I do think would be very, very important is that if we were going to go in this direction, I would like to see a lot of feedback from the community, which would mean community meetings and not just, a certain area is zoned for it, so go ahead and put one in, but to really get some feedback from the community in terms of how they feel about having this in their neighborhood. That being said, we do have dispensaries, one which is barely over the Rivera line in Saugus. We have that, several, I believe, in Chelsea and Lynn. So there are several around. And I would want to see strong evidence in terms of the revenue and exactly what kind of benefit it would bring to the city before signing on to something like this. I know that there are medicinal purposes and things like that, which Councilor McKenna spoke to, but I'm not quite sure if that's just CBD and also TLC or just the CBD. But I do think that community awareness and feedback on this issue is going to be key. So I just want to say that. Thanks.
Thank you. Hi, name and address for the record.
Ed Terrell, 70 Soul Street, Revere, Mass. Just two things I want to talk about. I just want to dovetail what Councilor Silvestri said. With the injustices that have happened with the war on drugs, I'd really like to see some recommendations of the Human Rights Commission about how to undo those injustices. The other thing I'd like to bring up is that I think that the Board of Health has the right to ban cannabis from being sold in Revere. They are probably going to ban a generational ban on cigarettes. So they also have that. It's just something to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I'll say thank you, Tom, for presenting. Thank you, Council Silvestri, for this very important ordinance. Sorry, permission to speak from the chair. Yeah, sorry about that. Still getting the hang of this thing, you know? But thank you, Council Silvestri, for submitting this ordinance. And I really appreciate, sorry, do you have something else? Yeah. Unless there's something else, motion to adjourn. So moved.